Good morning. My name is Garen Barnum. As you've just made that connection, that's my dad. But I'm really excited to be here, and I really mean that. One, I'm an assistant principal at an elementary school, so it's really nice to be talking to a room full of people. Nobody's crying. Everybody's shoes are on for the most part from what I see. I mean, that's a win in itself. Second, as he said, this is my home church. I preached my first sermon right here 20 years ago. That's really cool. I got married right here, okay? If you could see out that window, my bedroom was across that alleyway. This is my home church. I grew up here. And third, the other reason I'm really excited to be here today is we're talking about baseball, and I love baseball. And as I was talking to my dad about kind of my idea of what I wanted to preach about, we started talking about when we were coaching a little league team, and one of the worst things about any baseball game, if you have a kid that played baseball, if you've been on a baseball team, is the coach's son, right? Or the coach's kid, because they come, they have all the cool gear, and then they play and they strike out 15 times, and you're like, the coach's kid's the worst. Well, in this scenario, I'm the coach's kid. And so I'm really hoping this morning I don't strike out. That's the goal, okay? So as the coach's kid, I'm up against it this morning. But what I want to talk about today is steps of faith. But first, I want to tell you a really cool story, and that is about this girl right here. My family, we have become cruisers. Anybody cruise people? Like Bahamas, Mexico? Okay, I see some hands. You're my people, okay? We have become cruise people, okay? And what that means is we go on these cruises, my wife, my son, and my daughter and I. But Audrey, this is my daughter, she is 7. She owns the cruise, okay? She knows where every ice cream machine is. She knows where every pool is. She knows what time those ice cream machines open and close and what time those pools open and close. She wears the Carnival Cruise lanyard like a badge of honor. This girl is a cruiser, okay? And so I follow her lead because I'm like, she knows what she's doing. And so we recently were on a cruise, and it was the second day. You're out at sea, so you have the whole day on the boat. And she's like, Dad, it's water park day. And so I was like, all right, we can go to the water park. So we go to the water park as a family. I'm sitting on my beach chair as the kids play in the water park. I'm drinking my Diet Pepsi because I bought the Diet Pepsi, the soda drink package, so I knew how many sodas I had to drink every single day to make sure it was worth my money. So I'm just chugging Diet Pepsi. My kids, they are playing in the water park, and I see Audrey. She notices next to the water park there's these 3 giant water slides, and they're big. And she comes up to the fence and she's like, Dad, you should go on that. And I was like, yeah, no. And so I'm watching her continue to play. I'm continuing to chug Diet Pepsi. Now she comes back and she says, Dad, I think I want to go on that. I was like, okay. Right now? And she's like, yeah, but you have to go with me. I'm like, oh, okay. So she grabs my hand and we go up this spiral staircase, and we go up and up and up. And now we're at the top of this spiral staircase. I mean, we're high up and we're in the middle of the ocean, so that platform's kind of waving back and forth. You can feel the wind. You can hear the roar of the jets from all of these water slides. And the guy goes, okay, you're up next, to my daughter. And she goes, no. And she turns around and she makes me walk all the way back down. And so now we have not gone on a water slide, and I'm just sweaty. I am just sweaty. That's it. And so I sit back down, and not even a Diet Coke at this point is going to help. And she comes, I'm watching her, and she's playing with her brother. They're splashing on the splash pad, and I'm watching her, though, but you could tell she can't get this out of her head. She's stuck on this water slide. So she comes back to me one more time, and she says, Dad, I'm ready. I was like, okay. And so we go up, and we go back up that spiral staircase, and we're there, and the man says, okay, you're up. And Audrey turns around, she goes, all right, Dad, you're up. And she pushes me to the slide. And so here I am, I turn around, I'm like, okay, you're coming next. I go down the slide. I'm claustrophobic. I don't like this. I get to the bottom. I'm soaking wet. My shorts are soaked. I think it's from the jets in the water. And I get to the bottom, and the guy at the bottom's like, oh, wow, that's a grown man coming down a kid's water slide. That's strange. I get out, and I'm standing there, just dripping wet, and I'm waiting. This is the moment of truth. Is Audrey going to come down the water slide? And it's quiet. And all I hear is that roar of the jets. And then all of a sudden I hear a little 7-year-old giggle come down that slide, and she splashes into that pool. And she did it. And from that point on, she rode that water slide, and I'm not exaggerating, 26 times. And I know that because she told me every single time. She said, Dad, that's time 18. Dad, that's time 21. And after that, she's eventually like ridiculing other kids for being afraid. Like, she just owned this water slide. But her experience with that water slide reminds me so much of our experience with faith sometimes. We get to that point where we're up at the edge, and it's scary, and we have the opportunity to either step forward and go, or, go back down those stairs. And we have these moments of faith where we're faced with either go or take that step back. And I'm faced with this question sometimes of, okay, God, are you really the one calling me to do that? That's where I get stuck sometimes is, okay, I'm at the edge, but God, is this really you asking me to do it? And I get stuck there because sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just telling myself that. Sometimes I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's just the right thing to do, but is it really God asking me to do that? And so I've dropped the ball on that many, many times, and that's where I get stuck, though. And so I'm thankful we have these accounts in our Bible of people dealing with this exact same thing. And as Kate just showed, we're going to be talking today about Peter and his experience with walking on the water. He had this moment where he's literally at the edge of, do I keep going or I turn around? And he asked God that question, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. So let's go this morning and turn with me to Matthew 14, 25 through 31. And we're going to read this account of Peter walking on the water. And Scripture says this, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said. They cried in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he was beginning to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand, caught him, and said, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. That's Peter's question. That's what Peter says in this moment. He's standing there in the midst of a literal storm, looking at what he cannot comprehend. Jesus is on the water, and he says, come. That question that Peter asks, if this is you, tell me to come. That statement, that's what I want to dissect today. And so before we slide into Peter's story, though, I think it's imperative that we understand the person of Jesus in this situation. The person that's calling Peter out onto the water. The God who is calling us into bigger faith. See, Jesus only utters 9 words to Peter before Peter takes that step. But I think they are crucial in our understanding of who Jesus is. And these are the 9 words. He says, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. The disciples had just been following Jesus for a good chunk of time by now. They're still jumping to the conclusion that Jesus is a ghost, but Jesus, being who he is, does not rebuke them. He doesn't say, are you guys really this dumb? You have seen me do miracle after miracle. Hours ago, I just fed 5,000 people, and now you're doing this? No, Jesus doesn't do that because that's not who Jesus is. Jesus says, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. And when I see that word, with those words, take courage, I think we can see that Jesus understands this situation. He understands that the disciples are afraid, and he reassures them when he's saying take courage. He's reassuring them and reminding them of who he is. Because next, he says, "It is I." Now, many would argue that the original text here would actually say, "I am," not "it is I." And this is really significant because this is him calling back to the book of Exodus in the Old Testament when Moses asked God, "Who do I tell sent me?" And God says, "I am who I am." Jesus saying, "I am," "it is I," is saying, I'm the one. I'm in control. I'm the great I am. I am sovereign. That's significant. And the last thing he says is, "Do not be afraid." And he understands the situation, like I mentioned, but he knows that although the disciples shouldn't be, they are afraid. There is this debate on the exact number, but there's about 70 occurrences of that phrase, "do not be afraid," in the New Testament alone. And I believe that's probably because God knows we're going to be afraid. And Jesus knew the disciples were afraid, and he understood why, and he understood their situation. These statements matter as we take risks in our walk with Christ. They matter because they show us who Jesus is. He's not some demanding master that's out of touch with reality and is asking you to do things that have no purpose for your life. He understands us and the steps we can afford to and are ready to take. They show us that he is the divine God who understands where we are in our lives. And he operates in ways that seem counterintuitive to the way we want to live sometimes. So I want to examine one of those facets that are counterintuitive sometimes to us, and that is the timing of this story. The timing of this story is kind of strange. The disciples had just been out all day with Jesus, listening to him teach, watching him feed 5,000 people. And remember, if you remember that account, Jesus has them go and serve the people. So they just had served 5,000 people. And they're probably pretty tired at this point. And on top of being just absolutely exhausted, they're in the midst of a storm on the water. Now, they're fishermen, and they would have been keen to this, and they would have known that it's time to get off the water, because at this point, efficiency is key. You don't hang out on the water when there's a storm. So it makes no sense for Jesus to have Peter do this right here, right now. I would imagine that the disciples are like, "Come on, Jesus, are we really going to do trust falls with Peter right now on the water right now? Is this really the best time for that?" But that's the thing, is Jesus does not care about the disciples' timing. It doesn't make sense to the disciples, but Jesus has a plan. Maybe Jesus needed Peter to see the wind and the waves when he stepped out. Maybe Jesus needed the disciples to see Peter take that first step. I don't know. But whatever it was, there was a reason and a perfection to the timing of Jesus having Peter do it in the middle of this storm. And this happens to us all the time too. We look for God to move, but sometimes we want it on our time, and when it doesn't happen on our time, we begin to panic. We step out into faith with Jesus, and we have to realize that our timing has to go out the window. We have to stop trying to dictate the great I am. Let him lead. I find that most often when Jesus calls me to do something, it's at the worst possible time. The timing is crucial. And as I thought about timing and I thought about baseball, I couldn't not think about baseball because timing is a critical piece of baseball. And so in college, I was on the baseball team. Notice I did not say I played. I was on the team, okay? I got to eat a lot of sunflower seeds, though. And so I was eating breakfast with one of my teammates one morning, and he's opening letters. And I'm like, "Hey, what do you got there?" And he had notes from the Oakland Athletics and the New York Mets. They were going to come and scout him that weekend. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm like basically sitting with a celebrity. This is cool." And so the next day of practice, our coach tells us, "Hey, we're going to play a game, but we're going to play against each other." And so we get our teams, and I'm up next to bat, okay? So when you're up next to bat in baseball, one of the big things to do is you're working on your timing, right? You're watching that pitcher, and you're getting the timing, and you're taking that step. So I'm getting my timing. My timing is set in my head. I'm walking up to the plate, and I have the timing set. I'm ready to rock. And the coach comes out, he pulls that pitcher out of the game. And guess who he puts on the mound? Mr. MLB himself from breakfast the day before. And so now I am stuck in my timing. And this new pitcher throws a 93-mile-an-hour fastball down the middle. Have you ever seen a 93-mile-an-hour fastball? Neither have I. Because I closed my eyes in panic because I had never seen anything like this before. And it threw me off. I was so off because my timing was mine. I failed to adjust to the timing of that pitcher. And so when I see his pitch come in, I panic. I panic at the plate. I was stuck in my timing and struck out when I was met with new timing that wasn't in my plan. This is exactly what it feels like to have our timing shaken up by God sometimes. Sometimes that timing feels like a fastball whizzing by our heads. So pay close attention to that. When you get that tug from the Spirit and it feels like the totally wrong time, it might be the exact time Jesus is calling you to something. Fear and faith are uncomfortable. Faith can be uncomfortable, but this discomfort leads to growth. And in the account, Peter shakes off the shock of this situation, and he probably tells the disciples, hey, calm down, I'm gonna do this. And he, as we said, he says to Jesus, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. And once he does this, Jesus responds with that word, come. Now, it's easy to look at this story and see what is the main risk, which is death, right? Peter stepping out into the water. There's a good chance that he falls into the Sea of Galilee and drowns. We see that he might believe this as well because he panics, but this is kind of like an insane thing because Peter's a fisherman by trade. If there's anybody who shouldn't be afraid on the water, it's a fisherman. And so even if he falls, he's probably able to swim back to that boat. And this is where that tension, that conflict is that place that Peter knows so well is being flipped upside down by Jesus. Jesus is asking him to risk looking at his place of comfort in an entirely new way. This makes Peter's once sure feet totally unsteady. It makes him really uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you have that place where you feel comfortable and then it gets changed. And now you feel totally uncomfortable. I had this once a month in my life growing up because of this woman right here, my mother. And my brother's standing right there. He's gonna give me an amen. We would come home from school, and the house, this place we were comfortable with, would be completely rearranged once a month. You would go and throw your backpack down on the couch. The couch isn't there anymore. Now the couch is a dining room. I don't know. You would go back to and then this is not an exaggeration. You would go to your bedroom. Your bedroom was moved into a different room. And you'd have to go on this wild goose chase to find your bedroom. Am I right? Yes. Okay. So that's what it feels like, though. You go home to that place that's your comfort place, and things look and feel different. That's where you stub your toe in the middle of the night because you're like, why is that there? And Jesus is doing that exact same thing here with Peter. He flips the sea into something new to him. It went from being a fishing spot to a walkway. To me, this is relatable. When we step out and take that step of faith with Jesus and we begin to follow his ways, we get to those points where we're asked to look at our comforts in an entirely new way. And maybe that's how you run your family. Maybe that's how you spend your free time or where you spend your free time. Maybe it's what you do with your money or what you do not do with your money. Jesus has a way of taking what we see as comfortable and making it uncomfortable. He has a way of flipping it upside down. No one ever said following Jesus was going to be easy, and it shouldn't be comfortable. Just like Audrey, like I was talking about earlier, he perceives this as a risk. He perceived it as a risk because he had never seen or been asked to look at the ocean this way. Audrey had spent her entire 7 years of life around water and around slides, but when you put those things together, it was asking her to look at it in an entirely new way. Now let's slide down to the end of this interaction and dive into the most human part of this story. This is the part where I see myself, and I imagine you might see yourself as well. Peter falls. When he sees the wind and the waves, he takes his eyes off Jesus and he falls. How often are we in a situation where we take that step that God is calling us to take? We step into faith and into that thing, and the world pushes back and it seems impossible. God calls us to that new job. God calls us to have a hard conversation with a family member. God calls us to serve in a role we never thought we would. God calls us to fast. God calls us to put our phone down and spend more time with our kids. We take that step, but God, that financially doesn't make sense. But God, that person, they're impossible to get through to. But God, I can't serve there. I don't know how. But God. We take our eyes off Jesus because the wind and the waves take over. The impossibility that lies in front of us, it hits us. And guess what? There's a possibility that the thing in front of you is impossible for you, but it's not for Jesus. When Peter was doing was impossible. What Peter was doing was impossible, walking on water. He took steps into the impossibility because at first his eyes were fixed on Jesus. But we fall because we forget who's in control. Peter fails because he forgets who he needs to keep his eyes on. He sees the impossibility in the midst of the storm. But Jesus, when he falls, he reaches out his hand and he catches him. And he says this, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" See, I used to read this quote by Jesus like all caps, bold letters, kind of angry. But I don't think that's how Jesus would have said that. Now that I know who Jesus is, I don't think that's how he would have said it. This is a rabbi asking his student a question. Why did you doubt the impossible? I hope there's something rolling around in your head right now. A moment in the past, a moment in the future, or a moment that you're dealing with right now that feels like there's a risk. You have a sense of fear around it. And I hope you can just read that line over that situation. You of little faith, why do you doubt? Where's your imagination? Peter fails, we fail, and Jesus is not some high school baseball coach that's going to blow the whistle every time we fail and punish you. Jesus is looking for you to grow and there to catch you when you fall. He meets us where we are and will ask questions when needed. He knows you and he knows exactly how to meet you where you are and stir you to action. He also knows you and I will drop the ball. Just look at his disciple, Peter. This wasn't the only time Peter fails in the Bible. He falls asleep at the Garden of Gethsemane when he was asked to keep watch. He denies Jesus 3 times prior to the crucifixion. He questions Jesus when Jesus washes his feet. He questions Jesus after the transfiguration. Peter shoos away children when they come to Jesus. But unlike our failures, Peter's are recorded for all of human history to read. Great for Peter. Following Jesus is a risk. But not only that, he asks us to take risks over and over and over again. Peter did exactly this, and Peter failed many times. These verses show us that Jesus is more concerned with our hearts than our actions. He's not looking for us to be perfect. He's looking for us to grow. See, the same disciple that he says to come to him on the water who fails is the same disciple he's going to ask to lead his church in the book of Acts. Peter's capacity grew as he stepped out into bigger things. And I think of Audrey the same way. Her capacity for risk and for those big steps grew as our vacation went. Because she went on that water slide, by the end of that vacation, she was snorkeling with me in the ocean, looking at barracuda and these wild fish, something she would have never done at the beginning of our vacation. her ability for capacity, for risk, and her courage to be bolder grew as those steps continued to be taken. So what now? What do we do now? Do I just sit around and wait for something to happen? Not really, because we're all somewhere right now. So maybe you're new to this. And maybe Jesus is not your Savior yet. Maybe today your step feels like acknowledging who He is. Acknowledging that He is the I am. He's the beginning and the end. He's the sovereign one. Maybe your next step, if this is all new to you, is just coming back next week to church. And that is a risk. I can say, as someone who lives in the South in North Carolina, going to church on Sunday in North Carolina, everybody does it. I've gone to church here. I know not everybody does it. It's a risk to come back next week. Maybe that's your step. And if that's where you're at, I hope you hear Jesus' words. Have courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. Maybe you're in a season right now where you feel that stir. You're standing there, you're towing the edge, trying to discern, is Jesus really asking me to do that? It feels terrifying or even impossible. Then I'd invite you to listen to Jesus' invitation to come. Take that step. Pay attention to the timing. Pay attention to the discomfort. Maybe that's serving in youth ministry. Maybe that's bringing your mom to church. Maybe that's sticking up for Jesus when people speak badly of him in the place you work. Or maybe that's taking your summer break to write a sermon and preach it 600 miles from home. Maybe you're in a season, though, where you feel burnt out, like you've totally messed up in everything you've done. Maybe you feel like you've taken your eyes off the one that's in control. You ignored a call to faith, or you just flat out missed it. If that's you, I hope you hear Jesus' loving words say, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" Wherever you are in your walk right now, remember the big steps of faith are a part of the walk with Jesus. The more we take, the more comfortable we get, and the more familiar we get with it. And honestly, the more exciting this becomes. As you go out this week, pay attention. Pay attention to the Spirit. Pay attention to the words of Jesus, to the timing of his call. If it feels uncomfortable and impossible, that might be because it is for you, for me. But just like Audrey, we have this choice to turn around and head back down the stairs and ignore that rush. Or we can embrace the moment, the fear, the discomfort, and take those steps with Jesus. Because let's face it, a lot of people have skipped out on a water slide because of fear. But those of you that have gone on one know what a thrill it can be. And our faith is not so different. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you for today. I just pray as we as a church go out this week that we hear those words, "You have little faith, why do you doubt?" And we grow an imagination for what this church can do in this community and in this world. I pray that you bless these people as we go out into this week and into our world. Amen.